Hey everybody, hope you're doing well today. Welcome to the latest installment of the How to Draw series. A quick look at how to draw the most important diagrams in all of economics. Today we're going to take a look at the neoclassical aggregate supply, aggregate demand diagram. Let's take a look. Well, here we go. The building of the most important diagram in all of macroeconomics. And actually, I would tell you, this is the most important diagram maybe in all of your studies of economics. Maybe just next to the basic demand and supply diagram, the neoclassical aggregate demand, aggregate supply diagram is your best friend for studying macroeconomics, because on this diagram, you will be able to show a drop or rise in unemployment. You will be able to show economic growth. You will be able to show a drop in economic growth. You will even be able to show the rise of inflationary pressure or the possibilities of deflationary pressure. This is the most dynamic diagram that there is in macroeconomics. And here's the other thing, and this is how you should think about it. There are enormous amounts of stories here, right? Stories about people and their lives. When you talk about unemployment, you're talking about people's lives. You're talking about their livelihood. You're talking about their job, their occupation. When you're talking about inflation, you're talking about the possibility of people losing their purchasing power of their money. And all of that can be shown right here. Okay, so how do we draw this diagram? At the end of this video, I'm going to give you a little tip on how to remember all of this. But before we get there, on the vertical axis, you are going to have average price level, a currency, 0 for the origin. The horizontal axis is labeled real GDP. Sometimes you will see this as output. That is perfectly fine. I like real GDP because it puts it in terms of numbers. You're going to have a title, always have figure 1, and then the economy of whatever country that would be relevant to your studies. I live in Chile, so I put Chile up there. Okay, now what? Well, now comes the fun, right? Now comes the basic aggregate demand curve. Goes just like that, and that is labeled AD for, you guessed it, aggregate demand. And then comes another curve, which of course, wrong pen, which of course looks a lot like what you want to call it, which is the supply curve, but actually this is going to be something called the short run aggregate supply curve, and you're always going to put a 1 there. And then here's the kicker. For the neoclassical model, there is a vertical curve called the long run aggregate supply curve. And that curve is really critical to understanding how this thing is going to function, okay? Of course, we're going to have an equilibrium where all of those come together, and this is going to be PL for price level. And the real GDP at PL1 is going to be Y1. Why is it Y? Because Y is the variable used for income, and as you will see, or maybe you already know, real GDP output, that could all be reclassified as income. So that's why the Y variable down here is something so important. All right, now I'm going to clean that up a bit. That's how you construct it. Now I'm going to clean it up a little bit so it looks a little bit better. And there it is. Check it. Looking a lot cuter, except for the fact that I forgot to put PL1 and Y1 in a nice little type font. But whatever, there it is. You get the point. Okay, how are we going to remember this thing? Well, there's a little device, and it's not that complicated, but it's exceptionally useful. My whole idea about diagrams is that you do not memorize them, except for this one. And then if you know this one, when you get any question moving forward about inflation, economic growth, unemployment, you just draw this diagram. And how are you going to remember it? You're going to remember it the same way you remembered the demand and supply diagram, that base diagram that we drew together. It's a part of this how-to series. And it is going to be called, not the rule of 11, but the rule of 10. Check it out. 1, price level, average price level. 2, currency. 3, PL1. 4, don't forget the origin ever, I always do. 5, Y1. 6, real GDP. 7, AD1. 8, SRAS1. 9, LRAS1. And 10, you guessed it, is the title. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It is the macroeconomic neoclassical aggregate demand, aggregate supply rule of, wait for it, 10. Okay, my friends? So that is really important that you know, because here's the thing, and I've explained, if you've been watching this whole series, like I've been saying, like there are stories here, right? You got to figure out what the story is. And every situation in macroeconomics begins with a status quo, right? Before there's increased economic growth, there's this diagram. Before there's a rise in inflationary pressure, there's this diagram. Before there's a drop in growth that results in unemployment, there's this diagram. So if you are an econ student, this rule of 10 is hugely important for you because you don't have to think. And in economics, there's so many things to think about, so many things to track on. If you see a question, if you're an IB student and you get a question that is about, on a aggregate demand, aggregate supply diagram, show the impact of economic growth, you're going to get caught. You can't get caught in the economic growth part. All you need to see is that first phrase on an aggregate demand, aggregate supply diagram. Just stop reading. Draw this diagram. The rule of 10, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Every single time like this, yes. Every single time like this, yes. Every single time like this, yes. Why? Because if you know that this is the diagram and all of these have subscripts of 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, it doesn't matter what the rest of the question is. You can't go wrong. And so much in the IB program or any economics course is about drawing proper diagrams. If you don't know how to draw the diagrams, you're in trouble. And if you mess up and forget the origin, mess up and forget, to label this AD, and you just draw it because you're, got stress and anxiety going on, you're in trouble. Okay, so the key here is having a device in your mind, and you're going to remember this is the macro rule of 10. Macro rule of 10. Macro rule of 10. The macro rule of 10 is the diagram that can practically answer any question that, regarding the 5 macroeconomic goals of any good government, which are growth, equity in the distribution of income, trade balance, low unemployment, low and stable rate of inflation, right? All of those questions can be expressed practically, with the exception of equity in the distribution of income, expressed on this diagram. All right? So this is not something that you cannot focus on. You've got to know this. So until you can draw this cold, practice, practice, practice. As Allen Iverson said one time, practice? That's right. You got to practice over and over and over. But don't practice all the diagrams. Just practice this base diagram. For microeconomics, practice the how to draw diagram that's about demand and supply. For international economics, if you get there is something called the free trade diagram, a diagram that's also a part of this series that if you just know that, you can draw all of the other diagrams. In theory of the firm, there's a base diagram for each market structure. And if you just memorize those and understand how they behave, holy moly, economics comes alive, because economics is really, really about human behavior. It's not about lines, right? These are real human beings on here. These are real people who would buy certain things. And these are real producers and jobs. And this is a real capacity of a country to provide which to produce, right? And so if you just know this diagram, you're golden. All right, I've said that enough. Now listen, okay? If you don't need some help with some of the other diagrams, go back and take a look at the beginning of this video to make sure that you can build it right. And also you will see this diagram as you move forward in your studies of macroeconomics, being the base diagram from which I talk about showing inflation on a diagram, base diagram of showing economic growth on a diagram, showing unemployment on a diagram, okay? Cool, so there it is. Pretty cool. It even looks nice with all of the green and yellow highlights. Cool. Well, there it is, my friends, the neoclassical aggregate demand, aggregate supply diagram, the quintessential macroeconomic diagram, super important for your studies in macroeconomics. Don't forget, this is the How to Draw series, a collaborative effort between me and you. So if you have any suggestions, please make sure you put them down in the comment box below. Also, down there, you will see the link to the entire series, How to Draw. Quick videos on how to draw the most important diagrams in economics. All right, my friends, I hope you found this video to be helpful. I'm walking through Lo Barnechea, a neighborhood outside of Santiago, Chile. Take care, my friends. Be good out there, and we'll talk to you in a bit.